Welcome to another episode of Cocktails and Tea. I am your host, Cherie. What's up, y'all? How y'all doing? How y'all feeling? I hope that all is well with all of you. On today's episode, we're continuing on with the Cocktails and Historical Tea. It's my kind of rebrand. It's still Cocktails and Conversation. It's just Cocktails and Historical Conversation, the Cocktails and Historical Tea. And today we're discussing the interesting and emotionally charged and very layered. There's so many layers to this historical fact, this historical tea about Lake Lanier that's located in northern Georgia. Now, before the racial cleansing of Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Greenwood District of Tulsa, Oklahoma, better known as Black Wall Street, in 1921, 9 years before that was the racial cleansing of 1912 in Forsythe County, Georgia. And the racial cleansing of 1912 in Forsythe County is known as one of the most successful racial cleansing in American history. It's not the only racial cleansing, but it's the most successful racial cleansing in America. And you're going to find out why. Just keep listening. And you're probably by now wondering what the hell Lake Lanier and racial cleansing have to do with one another. Just keep listening, keep watching, and you will find out. Again, this is a very layered story. It's not even a story, it's historical fact. This is very layered history here. So if you're like me and you're a cocktail lover who's interested in history and want to learn more about the history they didn't teach you in school, then go and get your cocktails ready. Today I'm sipping on the delicious and fun Blue Lagoon cocktail. Now, as usual, you can have whatever cocktail or mocktail your heart desires, honey. But if you want to know how to make this beautiful cocktail, then head over to my Instagram at Cocktails and TENT and watch the Reels video of me making this cocktail. Or you can head over to my YouTube channel, also Cocktails and TENT, and watch me make it there. Not only can you watch me make this beautiful cocktail and other cocktails, but you can also get the recipe. And as always, please remember to drink responsibly. Please and thank you. Now let's get into the episode. But before we get into the episode, trigger warning. I told you that this is emotionally charged and that it's layered. Not only is it emotionally charged and layered, the content is a bit graphic and violent, and it could trigger some emotions, some strong emotions. So viewer discretion is advised, like they say on TV and stuff. Let's take a deep breath before we get into this historical tea, because again, it's a lot. It's an emotional roller coaster for real. So let's take a collective deep breath. All right, and let's get into some historical tea. All right, so just a brief intro into Lake Lanier, because we're not technically going to spend a lot of time on Lake Lanier itself, but you'll see what I mean. But Lake Lanier is a massive man-made lake that's located in northern Georgia, and it was created in 1957 by the United States Army Corps of Engineers after the completion of the Beaufort Dam. So Lake Lanier and the Beaufort Dam were created in conjunction to supply hydroelectric power and water to nearby Atlanta, which at the time was growing rapidly at the time. And also they built the Beaufort Dam and Lake Lanier to control the flooding along the Chattahoochee River. And today they still perform all of those functions. It still controls the flood along the Chattahoochee River, and it still supplies hydroelectric power and water to nearby Atlanta. Now, Lake Lanier was named after Sidney Lanier, who was a musician. And an interesting fact was he was also a Confederate Army veteran and a poet. Moving forward, this reservoir is 39,000 acres and 160 feet deep, and is Georgia's largest lake. I just want to get some of the basic facts about Lake Lanier out before we get into the real nitty gritty of it all. So Lake Lanier is a popular hotspot today for recreational fun in the sun. You know, they do things like swimming and boating and water sports, you know, and those type of things at Lake Lanier. And God knows it's big enough to do all of that and more. 39,000 acres, that is huge. 160 feet deep, that's huge. And you're going to find out why it's 160 feet deep, which moving forward. So even though it is a popular hotspot for people to enjoy themselves, it is also known as the site of multiple deaths and disappearances. Yes, I'm jumping right into the bull swanky. Now, quite literally, since the infamous Lethal Lake has been opened and open to the public in 1957, 500 people have died. And over 200, that's not funny, I'm not laughing at that. And over 200 people have died at Lake Lanier since 1994. Why are y'all still swimming? Why are y'all still going? Like, do people not, I don't think many people know the disturbing history of Lake Lanier. That's why this episode was called Drowned History, the true American horror story of Lake Lanier, because it is a horror story for real. And you gonna just keep listening, keep watching. Now, you know, even though it's the site of multiple deaths and disappearances, and over 500 people have disappeared or died there, or 500 people have died there since 1957, but that does not stop 12 million people from visiting this allegedly haunted, deadly ass lake every year. And yes, it is widely believed that Lake Lanier is haunted. I know, it went left into the folklore of it all, but there's so much folklore surrounding Lake Lanier, along with the history, that it was kind of hard not to talk about it, bring it up. It's such a part of Lake Lanier. Apparently, if you live in Georgia, or, you know, and people who know at least a little bit about the history of Lake Lanier will tell you don't go. That's what I read in many different places on many different sources. It said that the locals will tell you do not go. But again, that does not stop 12 million people from going to this haunted ass lake. Now, it's so haunted that folklore about Lake Lanier is so real that in the brand new season of Atlanta, for which we waited too damn long for, Atlanta fans know what I mean. The first episode discussed the allegedly haunted history of Lake Lanier. And one of the reasons why people believe that it's haunted is because Lake Lanier was built on top of a black town. Yes, darling, that black town was named Oscarville. So submerged in 160 feet of water is the once thriving town of Oscarville. And we'll get a little bit more into some of the hauntings and folklore a little bit later in the episode. But for now, to better understand why this government sanctioned massive man-made lake was built, we got to take it back to 1912 and back to that black rural town of Oscarville, and we got to take it back to almost 110 years ago, where two separate incidents sparked the racial cleansing that I told you about of 1912, and it changed the lives of 1,098 black people and also the generations to follow forever. They were never the same. Now, let's get into the thriving town of Lake Lanier. Hold on, let me sip, honey. Let me sip my Blue Lagoon. Now, Oscarville. Now, Oscarville is a small, Oscarville was a small rural town that's located in Forsythe County. So Lake Lanier is located in Forsythe County. And Lake Lanier is now over top of Oscarville, what used to be Oscarville. So Forsythe County, Lake Lanier, Oscarville is located about 40 miles north of Atlanta. And Oscarville was established in 1870. And Oscarville was the home of a free, black, self-sufficient, self-reliant community of teachers and farmers and ministers and business owners and servants and field hands and sharecroppers and tradesmen and craftsmen, children and elders. Like, they were a full-fledged community. They were people. Oscarville was situated along the Chattahoochee River, and many of the black families were situated. They were dispersed along the Chattahoochee River, along the banks of the Chattahoochee River. So it is said that there were 58 black families. So it said that there were 58 black families who were documented landowners in Forsythe County. And also in 1912, 109 black families in Forsythe County paid farm tax according to historical records. And that meant that they either rent or owned their farms. One black family of landowners were the Bagley family, and they lived again in Forsythe County. They owned 60 acres of land by 1912. 60 acres. I'm just trying to paint the picture of what some of the wealth that some of the residents in Forsythe County and Oscarville had, because Oscarville was farmland. So a lot of black farmers owned land, and some of them rent land in Oscarville. Now, another family that was thriving at this time in that area was the Kellogg family. Now, the Kellogg family, when slavery ended, their ancestors bought a piece of land, a small piece of property actually, in Forsythe County, and Joseph and Eliza Kellogg inherited that land, and they built it up. They built it up to the point where it was so prosperous that the Kellogg family became one of the wealthiest families in the county, keeping up with the wealthiest white farmers. And the Kellogg family had the only working sawmill in Forsythe County in the 20th century. The only. working sawmill in that county. And by 1912, Joseph Kellogg owned 200 acres of farm, and he was the envy of the town, honey, black or white. Okay. Now, another fun fact about the people in Forsythe County in Oscarville is that according to the 1908 Georgia school census, there were 316 black children enrolled in school. And white residents of Forsythe County, they had they really didn't like that. They didn't like the wealth that they were seeing some of the black residents acquiring. They didn't like that they were educating their children. And so they were really, really jealous. They had the spirit of jealousy on them. And they viewed that thriving, free, black, self-sufficient, self-reliant community that was known for their churches and known for, again, educating their children at high rates. They viewed that community as a threat. And in 1912, every single black resident of Forsythe County, including Oscarville, which is underneath Lake Lanier, was forced to leave. All 1,098 black residents. So virtually overnight, 10% of the population were forcibly removed through racial violence and that racial cleansing. Now, let's get into the two incidents, because I told you two incidents sparked the racial cleansing that forced all of the black residents, all 1,098 black residents of Forsythe County to flee. So, the first incident happened on September 5th, 1912, when Ellen Grice, a 22-year-old woman who was the wife of a farmer, reported that black men tried to assault her and was scared away by her mother appearing. And the local papers at the time claimed that she awakened and found, or this is a quote from those, from the local papers at that time, where she, quote, awakened and found a Negro man in her bed. Moving forward. 2 days later, on September 7th, Sheriff Reed arrested Tony Howe and Isaiah Perkle. No shade, but I'm just really trying to understand how you just awaken to find somebody in your bed. Moving forward. Now, while Isaiah Perkle and Tony Howe was in jail, awaiting trial, a black preacher by the name of, he's a black preacher and activist by the name of Grant Smith, went to the courthouse to plead for the release of the two men because they really did not have the evidence to hold them. But Grant Smith was overheard saying the quiet part out loud. Now, I'm not sure. I've read that he said this at a barbecue, what I'm about to tell you. I read that he was overheard saying this at the courthouse. I'm not quite sure which one of those are true or but I know he was at the courthouse and he was overheard saying, again, the quiet part out loud by allegedly suggesting or speculating that Ellen Grice may have already been engaging in a consensual sexual relationship with one of the men, which, no shade, take it however it resonate, but it wouldn't be the first time that happened, and it damn sure won't the last. If that allegedly was the case and that she was actually in a consensual sexual relationship with one of the men. And and she got caught and cried rape. Again, that is not far-fetched at all. It has happened. Again, it's just not far-fetched at all, to me, moving forward. But when local white residents heard about what Grant Smith allegedly said, they lost their entire minds. And an angry mob, an angry white mob, let's be real, an angry white mob formed per usual. So they stormed the courthouse, and um, they were, of course, yelling and screaming to hand over Tony Howe, but they were also upset about what Grant Smith allegedly said, was suggested, and the mob proceeded to horsewhip him on the courthouse steps. And they nearly horsewhipped the spiritual leader to death. I know. Breathe, y'all. And that was until Sheriff Reed, who, fun fact, later joined the KKK, just so you know what kind of sheriff, what kind of person we're dealing with. But Sheriff Reed and Mitchell Gay Loomis, who was the deputy at the time, dragged Grant Smith into the courthouse and locked him into a vault to keep him safe and away from the angry mob, who at this point, again, had stormed the courthouse. And it was so bad that they had to call the governor to get the governor at the time, who was Joseph M. Brown. They had to get him to call the state military in to disperse the crowd and escort Tony Howe, Isaiah Perkle, and Grant Smith to Atlanta for safety. Well, in Atlanta jail for safety. And so that was the first incident. Now, the second incident took place almost a week later, after the alleged attempted assault on Ellen Grice. Now, on September 9th, 1912, an 18-year-old white girl by the name of May Crow was found in the woods in Oscarville. May Crow was traveling home from her aunt's house when she was reportedly struck from behind and dragged into the woods, where she was brutally beaten, and it was also reported that she was raped. Now, she was found unconscious and half naked and bloody. And according to her great niece, Debbie Vermont, who did a interview with PBS a couple years ago, she said that her great aunt May Crow was hit so hard that her eye was dislodged from her head, but she was still alive and barely breathing. And she fell into a coma for 2 weeks, and then she subsequently died after, I think, contracting pneumonia, according to reports that I read. Now, while she was in that 2-week coma, May Crow allegedly, according to Blood at the Root author Patrick Phillips, who his book Blood at the Root is all about the racial cleansing of 1912 in Forsythe County. So if you want to know more about it, I would pick up that book. Or he has many podcast interviews that he's been on. He's been talking about it, making the rounds. Many interviews on TV shows that he has done about his book and about the racial cleansing, just trying to bring it to light so people know what happened in Forsythe County in 1912. But he said in his book that May Crow allegedly accused 16-year-old Ernest Knox of the crime committed against her when she, and again I say allegedly, when she allegedly regained consciousness for long enough to accuse the black teen. I also read that they found a small pocket mirror at the crime scene, and that somehow was tied back to Ernest Knox, for which I'm not sure what the correlation is with the small pocket mirror and a 16-year-old boy. I'm not sure if somebody saw him with it or if someone saw him buy it, but it's just a weird item for a 16-year-old boy to have to me. Moving forward, but that's just my opinion. So Ernest Knox was arrested at home and coerced into a confession of the crime as a result of being tortured by mock lynching. Now, they claim that a prominent resident of Cumming, Georgia, which is also a town in Forsythe County, like Oscarville. I personally believe that prominent resident was probably Sheriff Reed, because who else would have the authority to arrest someone? And I would imagine that they wouldn't want it to get out that the sheriff performed a mock lynching in order to get a coerced confession. So that's probably why they didn't just say Sheriff Reed arrested and performed a mock lynching. That's I don't know. I'm speculating here, but that's just what I think moving forward. But within that coerced confession, it is said that that Ernest Knox allegedly implicated 3 other people, and he implicated Rob Edwards, Oscar Daniel, and Jane Daniel. Now, interesting fact about that is Oscar Daniel and Jane Daniel and Ernest Knox are all cousins. Ernest Knox is their younger cousin who was visiting Oscarville at this time when he was accused of this crime and coerced into a confession. And Oscar Daniel and Jane Daniel are siblings. And Rob Edwards is the husband of Jane Daniel. So these folks ruined an entire family. And you're about to see why I said they ruined an entire family. Now, they were swiftly arrested with no evidence. Again, the only evidence they had was that Maycrow allegedly accused Ernest Knox, and also that small pocket mirror. This is what they went on. For which, though, these folks, their only crime was just being in the area at the time. Really and truly. Now, for many people, they believe that Oscar Daniel, Ernest Knox, Robert Edwards, which I'll be calling him Rob Edwards from now on, Rob Edwards, and Jane Daniel were all innocent, including, remember I mentioned Debbie Vermont, who is Maycrow's descendant. That's her great niece. She also said that she believed in that same interview that I told you about that they are all innocent and that her murder is a big cold case, unsolved murder case. And I also believe that. I believe that, again, their only crime was being in the area at that time. Which is why you gotta coerce somebody into confessing. Oh, also, there was a story I read also while gathering information for this episode that Sheriff Reed and Deputy Loomis would randomly go out and arrest the first Black young men that they can find. And they did that in both of these cases. So they did that with the Ellen Grice case, and they did that with this Maycrow case. So the first Black men that they saw is who they accused of the crime, who they arrested and picked up and accused of that crime. moving on. Word spread like wildfire of Maycrow's attack and also of the coercive confession. And honestly, the white community, they were still angry about the events that took place the weekend before with Ellen Grice and Grant Smith and all of that. And so they immediately decided that Black people were to blame. And also that Ernest Knox was the mastermind behind the crime against Maycrow. For which, before I go on, these two incidents are reminiscent of what the great Ida B. Wells called the old threadbare lie. Here's my favorite explanation of what the old threadbare lie is, and I got this from the Mississippi Free Press from their website. This is my favorite explanation and is the most clear and concise description of what Ida B. Wells meant by the old threadbare lie. Quote, that long undergirded the violence of white supremacy, myths of Black violence and sexual crimes against white women were used to vindicate mob violence to, in one way or another, keep African Americans in their perceived place, end quote. That's the best explanation for the threadbare lie that I can find. And to me, it directly coincides with these two incidents and also a lot of the other racial cleansings in America, like Black Wall Street started off with the alleged assault of a white woman on an elevator. You got Rosewood, also in Florida, also started out with alleged white violence against white women. And now we're learning about Forsythe County, the racial cleansing of 1912 in Forsythe County, and how two alleged incidents of alleged violence against white women at the hands of Black men sparked racial violence and a racial cleansing. The boogeyman is sexual violence against white women. That's their justification, is because white women were allegedly attacked by Black men. Moving forward. Now, Ernest Knox was taken away to an Atlanta jail to await trial because there was a lynch mob waiting for him at the jailhouse, and the others remained in jail in the town of Cumming. Now, once again, the angry white mob stormed the courthouse, stormed the jailhouse where Oscar Daniel and Rob Edwards were still being held because Jane Daniel and Ernest Knox were taken to Atlanta. And this time, the lynch mob gained access to the jail cells. I got a sip. Hold on, let me sip. Hold up. Taking an extra sip because it's about to get heavy. Okay? So feel free to take a deep breath. It's about to get heavy, so trigger warning. Okay? Now, so again, the lynch mob stormed the Capitol. You see how, moving forward, they stormed the courthouse, stormed the county jail, and gained access to the jail cells and dragged Robert Edwards out of the cell. Breathe. They brutally beat him with crowbars. They dragged his body around the town square and hung him up on a telephone pole. And the mob proceeded to take turns shooting into his lifeless body. Breathe, y'all. Now, if you're like me, then you're wondering and asking, now where the hell was the sheriff? Where was the deputy? Where was the authorities? Where was backup? Where were the police? Well, it's said that Deputy Loomis tried very hard to stop the mob of thugs who breached the Cumming County Jail, which is also considered the courthouse. So that's why I interchange county jail, courthouse. So Loomis tried to stop them from breaching the jail, all while Sheriff William Reed, OKKK joining as, allowed the mob to breach the courthouse because his punk ass went home and claimed to have no idea that was happening and that was taking place. No shade, but all shade, honey. What sheriff of a small town that don't have his ear to the dirt road? He don't have his ear to the streets. That he don't know what's going on the countryside. What good sheriff don't know the people of his town? I mean, it makes no sense to me that he had no idea what was going on. It sounds like to me that it was planned for him to go home at that time. It's just really hard for me to believe that the sheriff had no idea what was happening in that small town, had no idea what was gonna happen, what was going on, especially with what happened with Ellen Grice and Isaiah Perkle and Grant Smith at the courthouse. It's just really hard for me to believe that he had no idea moving forward. Now, Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel were both found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging in a 1-day trial by a jury of all white men. Because women, back then you gotta have the right to vote in order to be on jury. And women didn't get the right to vote until 1919, 1920. So at this moment, the jury were all men. So yeah, and they tried both of these men in a 1-day trial. No words. I have no words. And Oscar Daniel and Ernest Knox were hung on October 25th, 1912, right outside of town, on the property of a prominent doctor who offered his property. Like, come and execute these two teens on my property. It's fine. My property's open. And that property is still standing today. It has been restored to its former glory because it now serves as the Chamber of Commerce for the town of Cumming. Moving on. Now, an infuriating fact about the state-sanctioned lynchings of 16-year-old Oscar Daniel and 16-year-old Ernest Knox and 18-year-old Oscar Daniel is a 15-foot privacy fence was erected around the gallows because public executions at this time were illegal in the state of Georgia. But mysteriously, it burned down the night before. Not the gallows. The gallows did not burn, but the 15-foot privacy fence mysteriously burned down overnight, and they still hung these teens publicly. I know, breathe, y'all, because let me sip. Now, what's even more incensing than that is the spectators. Because according to the Dahlonega Nugget, which is a local newspaper that's still in publication today, the Dahlonega Nugget reported, and I literally read the archived newspaper clipping of this. It's available. I believe I saw it on the Georgia Digital Encyclopedia. I went there. and you can read there. It has like a section on the racial cleansing of Forsythe County, and you can read the breakdown of many of the newspaper clippings from the newspaper articles from that time about this. And a lot of it's disturbing. It's gonna make you want to come through the screen because it's in damn sane how journalists or reporters were able to talk and speak about people. Yeah, they were able to be really, really nasty and say some really nasty and disturbing things and get away with it. It's archived. You can go check it out for yourself if you don't believe me. But the Dahlonega Nugget reported that an estimated 8,000 to 10,000 men, women, and children saw those teens hang. You have your children. I mean, it but I also saw that it was 5,000 people. So anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people is reported to be in attendance to watching these young men hang in a public execution that technically was illegal at the time. But the spectators, they turned the lynchings into some type of like festival day, like some sick ass sadistic county fair, like a family picnic. You know, they sat on a hill and they bought picnic blankets and picnic baskets, and they yelled and cheered as they hung when they were hung. So it's just, and they celebrated as well. So you know that is sickening. It's sick and disgusting. Breathe, breathe. Ooh. So, you know, now after the lynchings of course, Robert Edwards and Oscar Daniel and Ernest Knox, and Jane Daniel was set free when she went to Atlanta. She was set free, just to put a button on that one. But after those lynchings, well, really after the funeral of May Crow, when nightfall hit, after the funeral of May Crow, there was an unhinged mob of white locals that continued the reign of terror, and they called themselves the Night Riders. Now, the Night Riders threatened, terrorized, murdered, and chased out of town all of the Black families in Forsythe County in 1912. They stole land and land deeds. And also some of them forced the Black property owners to sell their land for cheap or die. If they refused to sell their land, they were murdered. Now, these gang members called the Night Riders, they consisted of local white males. It said that they went around, that they will go around each night to each and every white home in Forsythe County to get adult white men to join their crusade of terror, to join the Night Riders. Now, just for context purposes, in today's world, well, not really, it don't really sound weird what's going on in the world today, but just for record, we're talking about a time where we're like 51 years after the Civil War had ended, and you know, during slavery and everything else, they would call on local white men, usually the poorest of them, and they would give them jobs as slave catchers and overseers and slave patrol, and which we all know is the origin of policing in America. So, just for context purposes, it's not far fetched or foreign to them for them to be recruited in this way to terrorize Black folks, is what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way. But uh, these gang members, because that's what they were. That's what the KKK are. They are a damn gang. Okay, they are thugs, huh? So these gang members consisted again of the local white males. And we're talking about the neighbors of these Black families. We're talking about their employers, their fellow business owners, um, their fellow field hands. Because again, we're talking about some poor whites. And some of them were not. Some of them were prominent. Some of them were business owners. Some of them were fellow farmers. And some of them also were elected officials, I am sure. Um, so these the Black families of Forsythe County were, to say the least, familiar with these men. They knew exactly who they were. It said that the night riders would gather at the town's crossroads armed with torches and guns and sticks of dynamite. So it is said that the night riders' method of terror was throwing stones through windows, firing guns through front doors, and yelling "get," that's a quote, at Black families. Like, and all of this was done in the dead of night, in the middle of the night. And so you can imagine how terrified you would be if you're sleeping and all of a sudden stones are being thrown through your windows, or people are shooting through your front door and yelling "get" at you, or torching your house altogether. So it said that they rode into Black communities and they burned down Black businesses, Black homes, churches, and schools. They also shot family pets, breathe y'all, the pets, and also the livestock that was owned by these Black families, or the farmers. So the night riders will also leave messages for Black residents telling them that they had 24 hours to leave. It's also been reported that Black residents would wake up to find bundles of sticks at that front door, and they knew that it meant that it would be sticks of dynamite the next time if they didn't leave. And it said that a lot of these families would leave by sundown. And so this really became a nightly ritual for the trash as night riders. So many of Black families were forced to leave. They were driven from their homes, and they had to seek refuge in cities hundreds of miles away. And they weren't able to really pack everything. So a lot of them left everything behind. They were really only able to pack and take the things that they were able to get on their wagon, and everything else was lost, which is why they left deeds and other family papers. And I can only imagine the amount of valuable things that they left behind today. I know they probably would have loved to not even been in that situation. But moving forward, so 98% of the Black residents left or were threatened or were forced to leave. They virtually erased every sign of the Black community, of that free Black community. So a 1910 census record showed that, again, there was 1,098 Black residents of Forsythe County. And by 1920, they were all gone. So really, in a matter of 2 months, in 1912, they were forced to leave the life, the progress, the wealth that they acquired all behind, And what's interesting is the racial cleansing of Forsythe County in 1912 was not the first racial cleansing in that area in Forsythe County. Actually, in the 1830s, Forsythe County was home to to the Cherokee Nation. And in the 1830s, the white residents of Forsythe County forcibly removed the Cherokee Nation and some of the farmers from their properties and pushed them into removal camps. It's also said that there were gold in those mountains that they wanted. Um, and they pushed them into removal camps. And this was government sanctioned. Look up Trail of Tears, look up the Trail of Tears, and also look up the Indian Removal Act, which was signed into law by Andrew Jackson's trash acts. Moving forward. So now, after the racial cleansing of 1912, Forsythe County became a sundown town. Now, sundown towns are communities, just for the folks who don't know where they are. Sundown towns are communities, towns, counties, neighborhoods that are purposely, intentionally all white. So they exclude the entire BIPOC community pretty much through violence, threats, discriminatory laws, and just plain harassment. That's their method. And honestly, was set Forsythe County, the racial cleansing of Forsythe County, which I told you was the most successful racial cleansing in American history, is that it remained all white for 70 years, for over 70 years, well into the 80s, into the end of the 80s, really. Because in 1987, Forsythe County was still segregated to the point that Hosea Williams, who was a civil rights activist, and fun fact, if you watch Housewives of Atlanta, Real Housewives of Atlanta, Portia Williams, who is no longer on the show, but she was on there for many years, her grandfather is Hosea Williams. But Hosea Williams, Coretta Scott King, Dick Gregory, Jesse Jackson, and John Lewis, and other civil rights activists and giants of that time peacefully protested in Forsythe County, and they were met with a similar treatment as of the history of this racist ass county. The KKK showed up and they chanted, quote, "Nigger go home." It was so polarizing. It was so polarizing at that point that even Oprah Winfrey featured an episode around Forsythe County and the segregation that was still taking place in Forsythe County, which happens to be one of Oprah's first shows in 1987. And Oprah asked one of the Forsythe residents if they believe that people of color had the right to live wherever they wanted. And the person replied, they have the right to, the resident rather replied, quote, "They have the right to live wherever they want to, but we have the right to choose if we want a white community also. That's why we moved here," end quote. Moving on. And that clip is available on YouTube. That I think the whole episode actually may be available on YouTube, but I know clips of that episode of Oprah is available on YouTube for folks that want to watch it. Now let's move on to some of the construction of Lake Lanier. Let's get into how Oscarville ended up on the bottom of Lake Lanier. So the white farmers that remained in Oscarville after the racial cleansing of 1912, they went on to prosper off the stolen land and property of black people that they stole from black people. So the wealth that those Black families would have been able to pass down, creating generational wealth, was stolen. And the thieves were left to profit and really prosper off of that. Now, they were so prosperous that they survived the Great Depression unscathed. Unscathed. Now, there are many other people that was thriving and surviving and prospering during the Great Depression. They were winning and prospering while the rest of the country was starving and looking for work. And they was profiting off stolen land. Moving forward, because Oscarville was made up of mostly farmland, that made it very attractive to developers who wanted to build the hydroelectric power and water to supply to Atlanta. Um, which I explained that earlier because Atlanta was rapidly growing. Now, all of the residents of Oscarville, with the exception of 5 residents, were asked to sell their land to the government, which reportedly the landowners were also paid for each building that they were leaving behind. Now, the land that they sold that to the government for the construction of the Beaufort Dam and Lake Lanier. So the United States Army Corps of Engineers uprooted trees. They relocated major infrastructure like bridges and water intakes. And some of the buildings that were abandoned, they were torn down, but some remain, and remnants of those buildings or those structures are still at the bottom of Lake Lanier, decomposing, of course. But they're still there. And that makes swimming and boating in Lake Lanier very dangerous, which is one reason probably why so many people have died or disappeared or had freak accidents at Lake Lanier. But the conditions underneath Lake Lanier are very treacherous. And it's not only structures or buildings underneath Lake Lanier that makes it difficult or dangerous to swim or boat in, but it's also like an underwater forest, if you will, because again, it was built over farmland. So what happens to land that's untouched and hasn't been cut or manicured, or people are no longer living on? It gets foresty. Trees grow, weeds grow, grass grow. So that's some of the things that's going on underneath Lake Lanier. Again, it's like a underwater forest there, and there's not much visibility down there. So much so that it's 27 people. 500 people have died there, but there are 27 people who have lost their lives at Lake Lanier, whose bodies were never, ever successfully recovered, which means that their corpses are still beneath Lake Lanier because recovery efforts were so dangerous that it would endanger the life of the rescuer. So they just left the bodies in the water, which is sad. But I understand that they don't want to endanger the life of the rescuers. Also, remnants of farmland in Oscarville that again was stolen from Black residents. Let us not forget that. Evidence of the farms still protrude above the waterline of Lake Lanier, and there are 160 islands visible at Lake Lanier, and those are said to be the hilltops of the farms in the now submerged town of Oscarville. Now, over the years, when the water levels had dropped down, like in 2009 and 2007, remnants of Oscarville was visible, submerged roads were visible, other artifacts, and also an old motor speedway track that was a famous structure in Oscarville. It was all revealed during those droughts. And now, another interesting fact about Lake Lanier is that the United States Army Corps of Engineers, which I told you earlier, they acquired the land. They run and maintain Lake Lanier and the Beaufort Dam. They identified and moved marked graves before they flooded Oscarville. However, the unmarked graves were left behind. So, yes, honey, so people are having big old fun in the sun over graves and 27 bodies. I mean, to each his own, y'all do what y'all want to do. Now, if you pair these unsettling facts with the historical facts about Oscarville, Forsythe County, and all of that, then it's easily understandable how I can understand how people would think that Lake Lanier is haunted, because it's almost like just so much negativity and it, almost like a residual haunting, like it's in some type of trauma loop type thing. There are reports of paranormal sightings near a bridge called Brown Bridge. Also, accounts of people who were good swimmers, veteran swimmers, were being snatched underwater. People who were disappearing, boating accidents that can't be explained, people seeing ghostly kayaks floating across the lake, and also cars crashing into the lake for no reason. I told y'all about 500 people have died since 1957 when Lake Lanier was open. In my last point about folklore, hauntings, and all of that is this. According to CNN.com, an article on there about Lake Lanier stated that a veteran diver by the name of Buck Buchanan told local media in 2017 that he sometimes felt body parts in the lake during his many excursions diving. He stated, quote, "You reach out into the dark and you feel an arm or a leg and it doesn't move," end quote. I mean, I'll let you decide. I'll let y'all decide and be the judge as to what you think going on in Lake Lanier, because that's an insane amount of people to die in one place, and folks still continue to go. That's insane to me. But moving forward, now wrapping up here, I wanted to get into a bit of, I guess, the legacy of the racial cleansing in Forsythe County, for which now we're a little bit of a part of keeping that story alive and telling the truth about what exactly took place in Forsythe County. But some of the legacy is this. Today, Forsythe County is one of the wealthiest counties in the state of Georgia, and it's still only 4.4% Black out of 250,000 people currently living there today. Whew. Now, because of the racial cleansing of 1912, Black families of Forsythe County in 1912 that were a victim of that, the descendants, if you will, were robbed of acquiring wealth that their families rightfully had to pass down, or would have had to pass down. Because again, Forsythe County is now one of the wealthiest counties in Georgia. And these black families don't get to share in that wealth, which is disgusting because they rightfully own that land that was stolen from them, or that they had to leave, that they were forced to leave. So, these racial cleansings and massacres or domestic terrorist attacks against black communities, not just in Forsythe County, but also in the more than 100 other thriving, free, black, self-sufficient, self-reliant communities, kind of causes a domino effect, if you would, that because it causes a domino effect because those families weren't able to pass down the land, the property, the businesses, and the wealth that they rightfully owned, and it obstructs generational wealth, and it creates, if you will, a wealth gap that we're still trying to close today. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps is what they say, huh? But when we do, you burn it down and then tell us that, we always want a handout. But when we make it for ourselves, you steal it or you burn it. And then you gaslight us and to believing that our history somehow brings you shame, when one would think it would bring empathy or compassion or understanding or something with your cold selves moving forward. It's really unclear exactly what happened to a lot of the black owned land in Forsythe County. And here's a quote from author Patrick and historian Patrick Phillips, who I mentioned earlier in the episode. But here's a quote that kind of helped, I guess, put into context the wealth that, or the effect of what the racial cleansing had on people. He said, quote, "I don't see how someone can imagine themselves in that very situation, could find whatever occurred under those circumstances to be anything but egregious. It's land that has changed hands many, many times, and even more rapidly since the property value in Forsythe County has become more and more valuable," end quote. Now, speaking of legacy of the racial cleansing of Forsythe County, Elon Osby is a descendant of the Begley family that I mentioned earlier. Her grandfather owned the 60 acres of land that I told you about, and he was forced out of his property. He was forced to leave it. Well, Miss Elon Osby recently visited the property that her grandfather owned, and it's now a luxury subdivision, a subdivision of luxury homes that was likely sold for pennies on a dollar, and now they're making an unfathomable amount of money. And she and her family were not able to share or benefit from the wealth of that land that they rightfully owned. So it again, domino effect. But I'm gonna close out with this. The United States United States House of Representative Democrat from Suwanee, Georgia, Representative Carolyn Bordeaux, recently introduced a resolution recognizing the vile lynchings and also the racial cleansing of Forsythe County in 1912. Representative Carolyn Bordeaux had to say this, quote, "While this resolution cannot undo the terrible things that happened to the Black community in Forsythe County, in 1912. It is an important step in increasing the public's understanding of this issue and finding ways to reconcile what was lost for many of the descendants who are here today. End quote. And lastly, back in February of 2020, so this year, several churches in Forsythe County partnered to create a scholarship called Forsythe Descendants Scholarship, which offers a $10,000 scholarship for people who are descendants of those Black families who were forced out of Forsythe County. Also, the Community Remembrance Project erected a historical marker highlighting or shedding light really on what happened in Forsythe County in 1912. And darling, with that was the drowned history and the true American horror story of Lake Lanier. Let's move on to Shots for the Road. Shots for the Road. I have two quotes for Shots for the Road. You know, Shots for the Road is a quote or song lyric that ties to the episode or that I just find badass and I just want to quote it. Okay, moving forward. Feel free to take a shot for the road if you want to. But the two shots for the road that I have this week is one is by Ida B. Wells. Another is from an economist and an author by the name of William Darity. The first one is from Ida B. Wells, where she was talking about lynchings and how they are, quote, an excuse to get rid of Negroes who were acquiring wealth and property and thus keeping the race terrorized, end quote. And William Darity's quote is this, quote, those folks who had been successful became the targets of violent assaults. What the massacres did is they extinguished or they resulted in the appropriation of the wealth that was acquired independently by Black Americans in the aftermath of the Civil War. So that was a quote by, again, author and economist William Darity. And honey, with that, I'm done. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cocktails and Tea. If you want to connect with me, then head over to cocktailsandteapodcast.com, where you can connect with me on Instagram and subscribe to my YouTube, where you can watch the video version of this podcast and also some of my stand-up comedy videos as well. Yes, honey, she's a stand-up comedian. Also, your reviews really encourage me and help other people find this podcast. So if my podcast ever made you laugh or think, then please rate, review, and share it with a friend. Thank you. Until next time, darling. Love, light, and insight. Cheers.